Seriously, I had to postpone it just a bit. Oh, that's shaky, isn't it? Trying to. Had to postpone it just a bit long to find him. He was hidden on my shelf. There you go. We'll work with it. We'll work with it. Hi, I'm Millie. I work in the assistance dog sector, and I also have been a handler of an assistance dog in training who unfortunately washed out, and I'm now hopefully in the process of getting a program trained dog. And today I'm going to be talking to you about what an assistance dog is. Now, that seems like a very simple question, doesn't it? But it really, really isn't, unfortunately, at least in the UK. In the UK, there is no formal definition of assistance dogs for the vast majority of the Equality Act. In fact, the only place where they're defined are in relation to private hire vehicles and taxis. And even then, the definition there is not the best for various reasons, but it would honestly take an entire video to cover exactly why this definition isn't the best. But for the rest of the Equality Act, there is no definition. In fact, the only thing that we know is from things like case law and from guidance from the EHRC, which is the Equality Human Rights Commission, which isn't government guidance, but it is. I don't want to say it's quite similar to, because at the end of the day it's not government guidance, but it's close enough that you can say quite confidently that that is the case. I believe they're considered an independent regulator. In the UK, disabled people are protected by the Equality Act 2010 in England, Scotland and Wales, and by the Disability Discrimination Act 1995 in Northern Ireland. What we do know is that they're classified as auxiliary aids, similar to wheelchairs or like walking sticks and things like that, which means that service providers and businesses have to provide a reasonable adjustment for disabled people by allowing those auxiliary aids to be in their businesses. For example, for an assistance dog handler, this may be in the form of waiving a non-dog policy to allow the assistance dog partnership to access that service. Now, this is where it gets a bit difficult. Generally speaking, in the UK, the way you would describe an assistance dog is something along the lines of an assistance dog is a dog that is trained to mitigate the disability of a disabled person. Which is a fancy way of saying they are trained to assist a disabled person in day-to-day life. And that is usually more of the phrasing you'll see, some of this kind of more or less technical phrasing. The EHRC guidance says that most assistance dogs should be highly trained. They say that that means something along the lines of they will not wander around freely, they will lie and sit quietly at their handler's feet when necessary, and also that they're unlikely to foul in a public place. You may notice that that didn't actually say all assistance dogs, which is really where it kind of gets more complicated. My general stance is that all assistance dogs should be highly trained, but by law there is some very intricacies around that, and I will probably cover that and the more intricacies of my understanding of the law at a later date, because reasonable adjustments are incredibly hard to talk about, because each reasonable adjustment is unique to the specific circumstances, which is why it is just so hard to talk about. By law, assistance dogs do not need any of the following: certification, registration, accreditation, or anything of the sort. So no identification or anything like that. In fact, they're not even required to have gear like vests and harnesses. An assistance dog can actually be completely unlabeled. There is no requirement for that. Of course, it helps with access issues and things like that, and you're more likely to be accepted into a service if your dog is labeled, just because it's quite clearer. But it is not a legal requirement. So in the UK, assistance dogs don't have to be any specific breed of dog. So not all assistance dogs are going to be or Labradors or Golden Retrievers. Some can be some quite unique breeds. I've seen a Mastiff as an assistance dog, Great Dane. Nearly every dog breed has the ability to be an assistance dog. They might not necessarily be all suitable, and there's going to be some dogs from breeds that are assistance dogs that are what are considered unicorns, which is a very fancy way for saying It just happens to be the temperament of that dog, but generally speaking, the temperament of the breed isn't suitable for assistance dog work, which is a fancy way for saying that that breed of dog has a kind of a high fail rate for assistance dogs related work. But you'll see breeds like Labradors and Golden Retrievers that do have those kind of higher pass rates because of their temperament as a breed in programs, just because it's going to be more reliable that those dogs pass. Moving on to things like that, how can you get an assistance dog? Now, fortunately, that is actually more of an easy question to answer than what on earth an assistance dog is. Assistance dogs are generally either trained by a program or trained by their owners. Now, there are a few other ways that you can get an assistance dogs, but I will not be covering them here because they are very specific circumstances, and generally speaking, it's something that you absolutely need to do specialist research in, and it's just incredibly uncommon in comparison to these main two options. So the two ways, as I said, is program training or owner training. Now, program training is what you traditionally think of when you think of assistance dogs. So things like Guide Dogs UK, Hearing Dogs, these kinds of programs will pre-train a dog to this high standard, and then they will place it with a disabled person of whatever disability that organisation caters for. In comparison to owner training, which is it's a lot more of a newer thing, and it's only really become popular in like the last decade. It's where a disabled person will either find their own dog or have their own pet dog, and they will train that dog as an assistance dog. Now, unfortunately, it's not necessarily as reliable because at the end of the day, for most organisations, by the time that your dog, this is not the case for all because each organisation has their own process, but for a lot of organisations, a dog will be going towards the end of their training when they are matched to their person, in comparison to owner training where it is just one dog throughout. So there is kind of this higher wash rate, which is where a dog fails out. Also, programs that have their own breeding programs also will often have a kind of correct temperament going through their breeding lines, which also can lead to higher success rates, which is potentially one of the main risks when it comes to owner training, is just there is that higher chance that your dog isn't going to make it, which can be a very hard thing, both financially and emotionally. So that is something to consider if that is something that you are looking to do. However, probably one of the most important things to point out about program training is the wait lists. Because, oh my goodness, some of these wait lists are years long. In fact, most of them are going to be at least 1 to 2 years long. Some of them are not, and that is very specific circumstances. Usually that's going to be the case if they haven't maybe opened up their wait lists for a very long time. Also, some organisations are very costly. A good chunk of them are free, but also a lot of them do charge as well. Assistance dogs are not a cheap thing. You may notice I said earlier there is no accreditation. Now, unlike the US, where I think it's a lot more common for that to be known, in the UK we aren't entirely over the fact that dogs can be, assistance dogs can be other things than guide and hearing dogs. We are slowly getting there, but we're not entirely there yet. And some people aren't particularly in the awareness at the moment that there is no identification for assistance dogs. One of the things here is that there is a good chunk of assistance dogs that do carry ID cards. It is not required by law, but also it is more accepted here that some partnerships will. I personally, as an individual, do not generally recommend people that show their ID cards because that can affect people's access. Obviously, there's circumstances where it is more appropriate, but accessing things like supermarkets and that kind of thing, I would never particularly recommend people doing so. That being said, people are allowed to also consider their own circumstances. Some people may really struggle with that confrontation, and ID cards can kind of help with that. So I do understand why some people do use them, though personally I wouldn't recommend it. So yeah, that is kind of the basics of assistance dogs. Now there is some more complicated things here and there. and I will talk about them at a later time. But that is it, mostly. If you are interested on finding out more information on assistance dogs, 3 resources I'm going to recommend are the Assistance Dogs UK website, which is assistancedogs.org.uk, which has a wealth of information now in their little information section. The EHRC guidance, which you can find really by typing in EHRC guidance assistance dogs, and also my own personal project website, Kate UK, which is kateuk.org.uk, with Kate spelt with a C, which is just kind of really all the information that I've said today in a kind of lot more easy to read format, and also without any of my little opinions here and there. As a quick disclaimer, none of my opinions or this video is in any way representative of Kate UK. This is completely separate to that. This is just me talking about my special interest to a camera. So anyway, I will hopefully see you soon. If you are interested in hearing more about assistance dogs, click the subscribe button, like, you know the deal by now. And also leave a comment, talk to me about assistance dogs, give me information, I love it. So anyway, I will see you again soon. Bye bye.